But the point is, so you bring those two networks together, right? And Vodafone, by the way, is the controlling shareholder here, and it attaches huge strategic importance at group level to supply diversity, and also attaches huge strategic importance to Open RAN at group level. I think it's very, very hard to imagine that Open RAN plan will change, which means that in areas of the West that are currently served or would have been served by Ericsson on Three's network, they're probably going to dismantle Ericsson, essentially, ultimately, take it out.
Right.
Unless you want to run two parallel networks, which defeats the purpose of a merger, doesn't it?
Totally.
And then across the rest of the country, they're both Ericsson.
Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast, about a week and a half or so after the last one, because that was on a Tuesday. And we've been up to all sorts of larks. The weather's been just relentlessly lush in the intervening time. Although I was planning to do a barbecue on Sunday and apparently it's going to piss it down then. So
is it?
That's a bit annoying.
I didn't know that. I'm out at a concert on Sunday.
You're at a concert on Sunday? Yeah. Who are you seeing?
Seeing the Arctic Monkeys.
Oh, excellent. Oh,
yeah. I once met was it
Alex Turner?
Yeah, in a guitar shop, like 2007.
Yeah,
when he was just starting.
Yeah.
Cool, nice.
Mate and his daughter. So
good band.
Yeah,
I couldn't name a song to save my life.
I've only listened to one album of theirs. I think it's called Favourite Worst Nightmare, but that's got a hell of a lot of good tracks on it.
Yeah.
Dance Floor.
That was before that. I Bet You Look Good on Dance Floor. That song was before that album.
That's quite old. The latest stuff's quite experimental. It's gone a bit sort of synthy.
They've gone a bit Muse direction, not Muse.
Called the
Radiohead,
I think, and it's not quite as tuneless, I don't think, as some of the Radiohead stuff that they did late on. But it's
'cause my son's been getting into Radiohead, and my favourite Radiohead albums are Ben's, which is their more classically rocky one.
Well, I liked OK Computer.
And he gives me, that was all right. That's a bit more of a grower though. But things like Paranoid Android, there's one or two others.
There's some really good things on that. Then after that, it got.
Well, so he's into one that's called In Rainbows, I think, or Over the Rainbow, or fucking something like that. Something to do with rainbows. And it's all right, but he definitely gives me a bit of a look when I say I'm Ben's. He gives me a sort of OK Boomer sort of look. So yeah, you old fuckers would be into the Ben's. We're us enlightened people are into this One Flew Over the Rainbow or whatever.
Same band.
I know. Well, but they have these different eras. Anyway, but the interesting thing, I looked it up. The most interesting thing about the Rainbow album they did is it was one of the first ever albums that a band produced. I think they were pissed off with their music label at the time, and they just come to the end of a deal, and they just thought, fuck it, we're going to just launch it on the internet and people can pay what they want. So you could get it for free. But it was quite pioneering at the time. So I think fair play to them on that.
Yeah. I wonder how much they made from it with that model.
Yeah. Well, we won't know, will we?
Won't,
but some people, a lot of fans will have paid. They'll have gone, fair enough, I'll give you $5.
They were probably they'd have seen that transition away from CDs towards digital music like that, because I remember buying the Benz and OK Computer, and even what was the very first one, Pablo Honey.
It's got Creep on it.
Yeah, Creeps.
The rest of it's not so good. Creep's a mad
song. Yeah. I know they don't like playing it because they sort of.
Do you know where they got the name Pablo Honey from for the album?
No.
Have you ever heard of a comedy duo called the Jerky Boys?
No.
Have you heard of them, Pierre? So they were these two Americans who would do prank phone calls and record them. And they'd all have all these characters. In fact, one of them, he had a character of this sort of neurotic Woody Allen sounding Jewish guy. Mm-hmm. And he ended up being the voice who does the Mort or whatever, the Jewish guy on Family Guy. He does his voice.
Right.
So that stereotypical New York Jewish sort of slightly whingy voice. Anyway, and they did one impression where they were doing a sort of an impression of, I think, a Hispanic woman. And so they ring someone up, and the people they ring up, it's just prank calling. They're just randos, but they ring them up, and this woman. So they pick up the phone and go, hello, and then they do in a voice, they go, Pablo honey, and they're saying all this like this, and it goes, and the person's going, I think you got a wrong number or whatever. He goes, Pablo honey, come back to Florida. And anyway, there's this whole thing, and in the end, you end up going, you bastard, you come back to Florida. Anyway, Jerky Boys, honestly, look it up. They've got so many of these things, and that's where Radiohead got the name of their album from, just from that little routine of the Jerky Boys. My son got some kudos because no one else, hardly anyone knows that, and so he went and told his mates about that, and then they listened to Jerky Boys. So I feel like I'm passing it down the generation.
Has that been verified? Do we know that for sure?
Yeah, it's verified on Wikipedia anyway.
Okay.
I mean,
has the Guardian fact checked it yet?
Yeah, it's that BBC.
The BBC's fact checked.
Mariana Spring, who's the only person in the world who knows the truth about everything.
She does, yeah.
So anyway, there's some random tangents to start off. One thing I'm going to try and remember to do. I know you get a little caption, Ian from Light Reading, at the start of it, but I always figure, given that it's called the Telecoms.com podcast, but it's very much a joint effort between the three of us. And only one of us permanently works for Telecoms.com. It seems only fair to give Ian from Light Reading and Pierre from however you define yourself these days.
Informer. Producer
Pierre from Informer a shout out, because it's very much a team effort. So there we are. What else have we been up to? So we, as I said on the last one, we went to the French Open last Friday.
That was after the last one, yeah?
Yeah, that's right. But I'd said on the last one that we were going to do it.
Forget when we did the last one.
In fact, I remember, I did my my shit Mary Clark impression on the last one, and she saw it.
Very kind about it.
She said it was fabulous.
Charles in town.
Yeah. But then she was watching the French Open. And then she sent me a WhatsApp while we sat there, and she spotted us on the telly. And just sent me a little photo of her telly. Yeah,
I want to see it. Show me.
Well, not now. It doesn't make for good radio, does it?
We'll show you. We were near the front. The umpire.
I mean, actually, you did send me selfies, so that's kind of.
I sent you selfies of us. Yeah,
yes.
of our little orange.
Did give you the hats? So you have to buy them.
No, they were little orange brand.
I think if you sit in the box areas, everybody seems.
You get a little hat. They come around with some water, and they even come around with a bit of sun spray.
Yeah,
because you definitely need that.
Yeah,
well, I need even more than he does.
Although that was an hour and a half, 2 hours.
We probably sat there
for at least two.
At least two.
But the match was pretty short.
No, because the first two sets were 2 hours, so we would have been there for longer altogether. The last two sets probably were about 40 minutes.
Right.
Together,
if we hadn't got up after the end of the second set to have a much needed champagne break, they basically had buckets of Moët back at the thing, and we thought, I thought,
Moet.
Oh, is it?
Moet.
It's not Moët.
I like the wry smile on his face then when you mentioned.
God, so Freddie Mercury pronounced it wrong. I get my pronunciation from Killer Queen.
Oh, really?
He says
because probably it didn't rhyme.
Moët and Chandon.
She keeps a Moët Chandon, but it's Moet.
Moet. Yeah, it doesn't flow.
Moet Chandon.
Good in this song.
Right.
Who knew?
But normally something ends in ET in French.
Yeah.
Is
normally,
like that.
But not for that one.
Okay, well that's just annoying, isn't it?
Such an inconsistent
Have a word.
language.
Say,
tell me about it.
Dear people in charge of French, sort it out. So yeah, that was good. We'd just go back and chug a couple of ones of those.
We were chugging, and then we noticed that the little guy had sort of done himself in.
Yeah, the Alcaraz. I know, that was a shame. We were just sitting there because they had the tellies in there, and we were sitting there, and then he'd knackered himself, and by the time we get back on the court,
that it was all going to be over.
The remaining two sets were just a procession.
Yeah.
But yeah, I suppose that means the total time we were sat there was close to 3 or 4 hours. So yeah, if you didn't protect yourself from the sun, you would have felt it. I especially appreciate a hat. So if you've ever had times, especially when you've been drinking in the sun, you get that banging headache.
Yeah.
That looks like a hangover on steroids.
Well, the what's it called? Sunstroke. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I was worried about
dehydration
blowing into the court.
I know. So he took it off a lot of time, but you didn't suffer too much.
I didn't want to be that guy whose hat's blown into the court.
With your Scottish skin.
That happens.
Well, it could happen unless you hold it down, because there were a few gusts of wind, and you can see people holding their hats down.
Give me the little string.
Yeah.
I'm waiting. There's going to be a time when someone's hat blows on, and it's like a crucial point, and Djokovic goes absolutely ballistic and smacks a ball at that guy. I really want to see that moment.
That'd be good. That'd be good.
He needs to be stopped.
So next time we'll bring sombreros.
Yeah.
They need to stop it at him.
We can bring sombreros, and they had a little band where they do those little trumpet bits, and then the crowd gets involved. Although, what was that thing? There was a bit that you'd normally expect the trumpet to do it, but people just do it vocally. Oh yeah. So normally there's this. Yeah. Normally there's that sort of Hispanic-sounding trumpet, and people go "Olé" or whatever.
Yeah.
But no, they would just get some random bloke who just do it verbally. And somehow singing in a French accent.
I think it's very democratic. Anybody can do it, and the rest of the crowd will join in and go, "Olé."
It's like a Roy. What's his name? Roy Kent in Ted Lasso.
I haven't watched
I
it.
still haven't seen Ted Lasso.
He's like an alpha guy, and he doesn't want to use a whistle at training, so he just says whistle.
So that was all good, but it was lovely. Many thanks to Orange for that. We had lunch with Marie-Noël, what's her surname? She's got lots of names. Yeah.
I think.
But she's very nice. I thought she was a really good speaker. We're not allowed to talk about what we spoke about because it's all like off the record lunch. But I thought, you and I especially were throwing questions at her, and I thought she fielded them all really confidently and really smoothly, especially when English isn't her first language, so fair play to her on that.
Yeah, that was good.
She gave me a bit of a dirty look when I said I was a leaver in
Not
Brexit.
surprised. Most people do.
I know, it's funny.
Don't throw that out to me.
But it's amazing how raw it still is. We're like 7 years down and people are still like I'm a heretic.
Yeah.
It's too Scott. But yeah, that was all good. But I'm not gonna risk abusing their confidentiality by even insinuating what she wants.
I need to pace myself. I've drunk my beer very, very quickly today.
Yeah, well, have
quite
another. We'll
thirsty
stick
coming
another.
in.
We're at the ice face. You were trying to put another couple in. When you get one out, replace it. One in, one out in. Or one out, one in. So yeah, that was that. I'd say the only downside of that day was that Eurostar was a bit of a dick on the way back, which led to us doing a fair bit of comfort drinking by the time we got on there.
What happened?
Well, it was just delayed and delayed and delayed.
2 hours.
And so we had to sit around in the terminal for a while. Ian was a bit grumpy when we got on the train, weren't you?
Yeah.
And then when we got on the train, they'd got us, Orange just sorted us out with like the class where you actually get a bit of grub on the way
I
back.
cheered up then.
And that means that you bring some booze. And
Nice, yeah.
and so they came around with a trolley of booze, and we had those little mini bottles of wine. He had red, I had rosé. But then when I went to go to the bog once, I noticed they just left the trolley unattended next to the bog, so I just grabbed a shitload of them and brought them
You
back.
get arrested.
But I think we even asked for more when he was wandering around as well. And he just
He generally did, but I thought better safe than sorry.
Yeah.
So
On that journey, which is like 2 hours, 20 minutes, it's worth having a little bit of food.
Yeah, and it took longer than that because of the aforementioned.
So what time did you
fuckery.
get home then? Like,
I got about 1:30 in the morning.
Same for me. Because I missed the train. I had to get on the 77 bus from
God.
Vauxhall.
It's not ideal. So anyway, that's quite a lot of talking shit that we've done. I'm not going to talk about the other thing we went to this week because we're going to do a final segment on it, the event.
Yeah.
But remind me to give a shout out to the people who I drink with after.
Mm-hmm.
So what has been going on this week? So the big news of this week was that Vodafone and Three UK have finally announced that they want to merge. I can't remember what the numbers are about it's like a 15 billion quid deal or something like that.
Well, I don't think they attached a value to it. I mean, the banks might have done, and I think it's at that sort of level. I think.
actually,
There's nothing in their statements.
No, because it's not whole companies; it's just arms of companies. It's not so easy to just put a number on it.
dumb question, but who's the biggest out of the two?
Vodafone,
the resulting joint venture will be 51% owned by Vodafone Group and 49% owned by CK Hutchison.
Vodafone's definitely bigger in terms of market share in the UK market.
Right.
Yeah, that's clear.
In fact, the Vodafone statement that got put out, which I didn't actually refer to at all, I don't think, when I wrote it out, because I tried to do it pretty quickly, and I think theirs came through after the sort of more generic one. But they did have a breakdown of how much each company makes in revenues, which was a lot clearer than they put in their kind of Hutchison and Vodafone Group statements, because they had a breakdown of capex and everything as well. So I wrote something today, actually, where I referred to that for the first time, because it was quite interesting to see what the two companies spend if you add them up, and then what they're planning on spending over 10 years together. It's quite a bit less.
Right, so they're going, look, we're going to spend all this, and then you did the maths, and you realised that was less than they would have spent otherwise.
So they spend, their combined capex last year was about 1.5 billion, about 750 each, basically.
Right.
They're spending, they've promised to invest, and it is capex, because it's in the footnote, the small print, is what they mean is capex. Over 10 years, 11 billion. If you annualise that, it's 1,100 a year, so it's 400 million less.
Short of 1.5.
Now, they would say, obviously, it's better to spend 1,100 on one network than 750 on one network,
Right.
and 750
But it's
on
still
another network.
not by itself a point of virtue.
Well, this is one of the reasons I think that the suppliers need to worry a little bit. Yeah.
Well, let's get onto that in a sec.
Yeah.
But I think that is a good angle. And I know you've looked into that more than I have.
You wouldn't expect them. I mean, it's not really a great surprise because they're obviously one of the reasons to merge is to realise synergies is the word.
Quite.
Which I hate.
Yeah.
But that comes in the form of capex savings, operational cost savings, closing shops, all the things that go along with that.
Yeah, if there's two shops near each other, it'll be like, let's cut one. And
totally, exactly. You don't need, and you don't need two cell sites right next to each other.
That means they're going to open more kebab shops instead.
Well, I'm never going to vote against that. So one thing I took from it, so straight away, what I was wondering about when they announced it is, was there some kind of signal alongside the announcement that it was likely to be approved, but there wasn't. So, obviously we know that big M&A, especially in telecoms, is notoriously hard to pull off in terms of regulatory approval.
Yeah.
Because it's a very heavily regulated industry one of the main reasons being that there's an incredibly high barrier to entry. As I probably said before, we couldn't go off and create Scott, Ian and Pierre networks tomorrow unless we had a ridiculous amount of money.
You could do an MVNO, give it a shot.
Do an MVNO, yeah. Well, but the barriers to entry obviously refer to MNOs, not MVNOs. In other words, it's very expensive.
Hypothetically, how much money would we need, do you think?
To do an MVNO?
Off the top of it? No.
To create a mobile network, a 5G network from scratch.
Like Ryan Reynolds did it, so.
Billions to... No, he did an MVNO.
That was MVNO, Ryan Reynolds. Mint.
Yeah. The Mint's an MVNO.
There's only three.
The ones that are doing it are Dish. You see what the problems that Dish is in, which is already a big company, and Rakuten.
I don't know if Mike has been
years.
off, so.
Right, so Rakuten's the other one.
Right.
5 billion in losses over the last 4 or 5 years or something, as part of a big e-commerce group in Japan. That's all come about because it's tried to build a mobile network. It has built a mobile network, but that's what's happened.
So yeah, I mean, if
that's why nobody does it.
But they're not Ryan Reynolds.
Maybe if they got Ryan Reynolds, things would be different. Who knows?
Yeah.
Just the marketing genius.
I'd put it this way: it'd be cheaper to buy Wrexham.
Yeah.
So about $1 billion a year, maybe.
Fuck.
Well, that's what they're talking about spending basically on capex. But that's upgrading networks.
And that's before you employ people and
not
all that kind of shit.
If you're building one from scratch, you don't have any sites. Then your capex has got to be a lot higher at first if you want to do it quickly.
So, but somebody like Elon Musk could decide to do it.
Yeah,
he could. But why would
fuck
he?
everything up?
Or MBS. I was just reading. I was just reading in The Spectator, complete tangent. MBS stands for Mohammed bin Salman, who's the leader of Saudi Arabia, or at least the
Prince,
considered, Crown Prince. The
murderous prince,
who has a complicated relationship with journalists, let's say.
Yeah.
I might want to go there one day, so I might just keep the rhetoric down.
Really?
Well, I mean,
okay.
No, I mean,
I know people who've been there for work.
He's alleged to have.
Scott is looking at all the soccer players.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a country you visit to see great sights or anything.
No, you go there for work.
You go there for work.
I know. I'm just thinking. I'm already worried about going to China because I've taken the piss out of.
China's got things to see and a reason to go.
Yeah.
I think Saudi Arabia's got like big skyscrapers and desert.
But what if some gig comes up where I've got to go over there to represent Telecoms.com and I've got to go to my boss? I'm not going over there because I took the piss out of MBS and suggested he might be into chopping up journalists, and now I'm worried that I'm going to be next on the fucking chopping block. I don't know if they'd accept that as an excuse.
I think they would.
I think, well, he probably knows that people know, so saying that he did that is fine, but don't say anything bad about him.
Yeah. I'm just saying other people have said that.
Don't say it when you're over there.
Don't say it when you're over there.
Don't say it to his face if you meet him.
Don't even just say, if you want someone to hurry up, don't say chop chop. They might just misinterpret that. He says, all right then, if you insist.
I'm going to blow this to pieces.
But I was reading something in The Spectator. It's a complete tangent. I'll just do it very quickly. There's been this drama in the golf world because the Saudis funded a breakaway, like the PGA, which is the American golf.
I thought you said the golf world.
Yeah.
Golf. Oh, well, golf, yeah. They should call it golf. Just to annoy commentators.
There's a golf over golf.
So the PGA is the American tour. That's where most of the money is. And they come up with this tour called LIV, let's call it Live. And that's funded by Saudi Arabia. Apparently, the Sovereign Wealth Fund in Saudi Arabia has got more money than ever at the moment. Probably because
everyone's buying it from them instead of from Russia.
So, and the PGA were complaining until
the PGA initially were going, you can't go with them. They're all nutters.
Until
and then suddenly Liv went, how about how about this skip full of cash? And they went, yeah, well, I think you're onto something there. And now apparently
proving something.
So now they've merged, and apparently the Saudis are now the majority owners of PGA Golf.
Yeah.
And then there's all these people like Rory McIlroy that were coming out and going, if you join Liv, then you're a fucking traitor. Now they're having to go do a complete 180.
That's a timeless morality tale, that is.
Yeah.
Really
and so the Spectator piece was just about how Saudis can just buy anything they fucking want.
Yeah.
Right, including Newcastle.
And potentially Manchester United.
Is that,
but at some point, the UK government is going to be like, you need to stop.
Yeah, and in a few years' time, the UK government will go, we don't want all these Middle Eastern companies involved with UK businesses. That's not a good thing. They're,
right. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think my general feeling is that nearly everyone is corruptible. And I'm not saying I'm not. You know, if MBS, if I haven't totally alienated him, comes up to me and goes, Scott, do this, and here's a ton of money. There's all sorts of ways I could rationalise it. I could think about how the legacy I'd set up for my kids, all that sort of stuff. You know, there's all sorts of ways you can rationalise corruption. Yeah. But, you know, there is the fact that once you take that money, you are owned.
Yeah.
So you have to think.
Yeah, it's like the mafia, right? I'll do a favour. And then you're like, shit.
And you're rich, but you're not free anymore.
No.
So you got to think long and hard before you take that.
You feel like, I'll do this one favour and you give me this much, and then that's it, yeah? Yeah,
totally.
Yeah. Trust me, after that...
Or like in Goodfellas when they bankroll that restaurant and then they tell him he's got to torch it for the insurance.
Well, you haven't gone into organised crime yet, Scott, so maybe you could resist.
No, but I'm saying...
Not that you know
I'm saying that the same transactional relationship that applies to organised crime, and which Pierre brought out, I wasn't going on about organised crime, basically applies to any transactional relationship. It's just with organised crime, there's a more overt mechanism for enforcing that contract through violence and threats.
I think he's demonstrated that he's pretty much into that as well. We'll put him in the same category.
Well, this is my point. I don't think there's that much difference. I think power is power.
Yeah.
This is nicely covered in Syriana. It's a good movie.
It is. This is a massive tangent.
It is. Let's get back. How did I get onto that?
I don't know.
All right.
So Vodafone 3.
MBS could start his own network.
Oh, that's it. He could. There we are. So that was that tangent. Sorry, everyone.
So rewind.
This is what happens when we don't have a guest.
Rewind it back to
just buy Etisalat or whatever.
Yeah, he probably does already owns it. Fuck knows.
Yeah.
So you're talking about barriers to entry.
He's got more yachts than I've had hot dinners. Yeah.
You were talking about barriers to entry.
Yeah, so that was it. Barriers to entry. So let's get back to it. Sorry, everyone. Bad discipline by me there. So the long and short of it is the thing I want to lead up to is, and I thought their press release sort of emphasised this, the deal itself is not a big surprise. It had been trailed for ages. It had been rumoured for ages. I actually resisted, and Telecoms.com writing up, there was some rumours like Reuters or Bloomberg or someone got a little trial balloon or the FT. And I hate writing up those, not just journalism, but journalism that something might happen.
Yeah.
It's alluring because it's a big topic, but I'm pleased we sat on it because we thought it might break while we were at the French Open. It turned out it took about half a week longer than that. But nearly all of their press release was all about how great it's going to be. How great it's going to be for England. Just a fucking brilliant move it is for everyone.
The sun will be out forever.
Yeah, do you know what I mean?
The birds will be singing.
And so basically straight away, all their messaging was directed at those regulators, at the CMA, at Ofcom, at the government.
Mm-hmm.
This will fix 5G.
I mean, they even come up with, and this quite often happens with big M&A, a special website that's called VodafoneN3.uk.
There was some bullshit about all the economic benefits of it, wasn't there?
Yeah. So when you click through on VodafoneN3.uk, the landing page,
the economic benefit for them.
The landing page has got Vodafone and 3 logos, a sort of new development of houses, just showing how they care about normal people. Yeah. And then
lives will be transformed by this 5G standalone.
Yeah, look at them not being able to get the internet. That will soon change.
Yeah.
And then it goes, great for customers, great for the country, great for competition.
Yeah.
Those are their 3 great fours.
Yeah, we're not really sure about the last one, are we? But
I mean, I don't see... Well, I mean, no, obviously on its surface, any consolidation means less competition. I mean, that's why it gets scrutinised.
Did you join the press call that they did?
No. I forgot. I think I was walking the dog.
Well, the agency phoned me up and said, "Are you coming on this press call that we've got for the trade and analysts soon? Because we see you missed the earlier one that you got invited to for mainstream media." And I was like, "Well, I didn't get invited to the mainstream media one."
Right.
And but I did join the one that it was the same. I mean, they in fairness, it was Ahmed Essam, I think, is the CEO of Vodafone UK, and Robert Finnegan is.
Well, that's the other reason I didn't do it. Is because I knew what it would be. It was inconceivable to me that they would say anything on that press call that wasn't
they took
entirely
Q&A.
scripted. Okay. And were there any meaty questions?
Well,
are you having a laugh?
There was some questions about like branding and what they were going to do on that, but I thought he came out with he got challenged on the competition side. I can't remember who by, but is the CMA or authorities, are you expecting pushback from this? Now, they'd obviously already made their case in the press release, but it was quite interesting to hear Robert Finnegan on the spot sort of winging it, kind of, because he got quite agitated, and he was like, well, at the moment we're in a duopoly.
Oh, I see.
We're in a duopoly.
How weird that you'd be defensive about that utterly predictable
of these
question.
two converged operators, those being obviously BT and EE and Virgin Media and O2, with it almost making out that the other two, Vodafone and Three, the ones that are trying to merge now, are a complete irrelevance in the market and they don't do anything. And yet, actually, if you look at the performance recently, I think, from what Kester Mann, who's at CCS Insight, was saying, I think those are
him and Paolo were the quickest off the mark with their comments,
which is predictable. They usually are. But I think Kester was saying they've been, maybe even Paolo was saying this as well, they've been the two best performing operators in the last sort of year. Vodafone, for all its problems and all the crap that's been going wrong at Vodafone for a while, the UK has been a really strong market for Vodafone. They've actually been doing really, really well. So this suggestion that it's a dysfunctional market and that they're not really doing very well in it at all, I think was slightly, I don't know, it didn't quite chime with the recent performance. Now, I know there's this longer argument about, which they came out with on the press call as well, about returns on investment, and that they don't cover their cost
that's
of
the one they've
capital.
been sweating for ages.
It's ages,
return on capital invested, isn't it?
It's return on capital invested. I mean, it's not that long though. You go back to the days of the days of the O2-3 merger,
right?
And I'm guessing this is what's changed. People say, well, what's changed in the last few years?
Yeah.
Because that got blocked. So what's the rationale now? I'm guessing one of the things that's probably changed, which is why they've started harping on about it a lot, is that two of the operators in the market are not covering their costs. Basically, if you look at this formula where you put what you return on capital employed, I think, over weighted average cost of capital, the percentage figure comes out that they're just not basically covering their costs. And there's a little chart I think that Ofcom even did.
Okay.
And then we both wrote about it because the government came out with that wireless strategy paper
where they basically
replicated that chart and went, oh, here's a reason maybe the deal should happen, which I thought was a bit of a weird thing to be doing.
Signaling, wasn't it?
It was, and also given that it's a decision that's supposed to be taken by an independent authority that's not the government. I thought it was a bit of a weird thing to do. But I did actually want to ask a question in that press conference, but I couldn't because I couldn't find it was one of those ones with about 70 journalists on it or something.
Right.
And you're supposed to do those raise hand things.
Right.
And I couldn't see it. I couldn't find the.
What was the platform? Teams, Zoom.
It was on Zoom, which I'm not used to using that much, but I couldn't find the thing to actually
find the raise your hand.
What I wanted to ask was, do you expect there to be any concessions you'll be required to make?
Yeah.
Which there hasn't been a huge amount of discussion of in terms of giving up spectrum. And also, what are you going to do about these two network sharing deals that you're involved in? Because you'll have a leg in either camp, basically. So, just
recap for our audience who might not know what that situation is.
So there are two towers companies, or passive equipment and some active equipment sharing that goes on through these two organisations called MBNL, and the other one I think is called Cornerstone, or it seems to get referred to as Beacon quite a lot these days. Right. So I don't know if the name's changed, but basically MBNL, one of those network sharing deals, is, I'm probably going to get these wrong now, but I think MBNL's BT and Three.
Okay.
And Cornerstone is Vodafone and O2, which is quite awkward for the purposes of a merger between Vodafone and Three, because it means the merged company is involved in both of them, and it automatically
they presumably eventually have to pick one.
Exactly, and I think that's quite a big obstacle to have to be dealt with, and that's the question I wanted to ask.
Because it will mean when they pick one, the other one won't be sharing anymore.
But I was trying to think, how do you get around this, and I couldn't think of an easy way to get around that problem. I couldn't myself come up with an analysis that explained what the CMA would recommend as a remedy to deal with that issue.
I mean, so you're talking about passive. Like when I see I've been doing.
I don't think it's just passive. Actually, I think I'm wrong on that. It's active sharing.
I've been doing this job for so long that now when I go past a tower and I know there's telecom stuff on it, whether it's one of those lamppost-looking things or just a full-on tower.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so sad. They're going like, telecoms. That's my fucking day job. That is over there.
You become a train spotter.
Yeah, except for towers.
Tower spotter.
Train spotting seems less sad. But then, they're often quite. You don't see them that regularly. Let's say if you're driving down the A1 or whatever.
Yeah.
And
a lot of them are on rooftops.
Yeah. But so the ones, the obvious towers are the ones where there aren't buildings in it. And I sometimes wonder whether all of the operators have got a piece of the action on that tower. They've all got a radio up there, or both of those.
Well, no, that only really
network.
happened. So Teresa, my colleague, and I went for a walk with a company called Freshwave, who we had on the pod a few weeks ago,
Tom
around
Bennett,
the city of London, where they have antennas that are used by all 4 operators.
Yeah.
So Freshwave is like a neutral host, and it's basically supporting all equipment for all of them on shared sort of infrastructure. And I mean, ultimately, that's where it could.
Well, that's what I was leading up to. That's how I see it's concluding, and maybe it will require regulatory intervention to ensure it happens. They're just going to go, all right then, but now everyone is sharing each other's infrastructure.
Do you know, he'd be actually a really good person to ask about it, I think. Maybe he wouldn't want to disclose an opinion on it, but to ask Tom Bennett or someone at Freshwave what they think of this deal and what it means for the sort of tower.
If you're listening, Tom, let us know.
What it means for those active and passive sort of sharing arrangements, because I think it's a really complicated thing to sort of deal
when you've
with.
only got 3 players, it just makes sense for there to be a pooled resource.
Yeah, but then the trouble then is,
how do they differentiate?
It's not. There's the problem we talk about a lot on the podcast. There's a competitive sort of monopoly, isn't there? There's not competition. There's a single sort of provider. So,
but then to what extent do they differentiate on coverage? I know we talk about.
I think quite a bit.
Peers on 3, and I'll slag them off. Sorry 3 if I'm being unfair, but they seem to have the worst coverage.
Yeah.
But that hasn't put Pierre off. But then maybe that affects their pricing. Maybe you went there because you're a tight ass and they're the cheapest, and are you willing to make that trade off? I wonder. You could probably.
I paid £12 for 12 gigs.
That seems pretty cheap to me.
Okay.
I pay something like.
Obviously, it includes 5G, and I think they were the only ones who just like rolled 5G into it.
I pay about 60 quid for about 120 gigs. Which I then just dosh out to the rest of my family, and so that's
60 divided by 4, really.
Yeah, so it's just me trying to be cute. I'm paying for all of my family. I'm paying for 4 contracts for 60 quid. So you could call it
15. Yeah.
You could call it 15. Yeah, 15 for 30. Yeah. So that's not bad, is it? The only thing is I have
because
to.
You've been a customer for years, or?
It's partly that, and just partly that if you do this thing where you manually gift the data yourself, then it's just more efficient. Rather than everyone being on a contract where they're self-reliant on the data allowance, you just have one person who gets a shitload, and then they just use the app to dosh it out. Anyway, so yes, that could be one of the things that they
pay £12.
I pay 60 quid.
60,
but I get 120 gigs.
You
for
pay
that.
£12.
Yeah.
Bloody hell, that's nothing. No wonder they haven't got any money. It's all because of people like you.
Yeah.
You should be ashamed of yourself.
I looked on the website, like they really push for the other contracts who are more like 18 and stuff, but yeah.
There was another bit of news this week which is actually relevant to that tangent. God, I wrote it up. Let me see if I can find it. Basically... on
towers, you mean?
No, this is on tariffs. Let me see if I can find it.
While you're looking for that, I'm gonna ramble on.
Go
because
go
I think that the question that I couldn't ask because of my incompetence with using Zoom and trying to find the raise hand button on it. I think it's one of the most interesting things is I'm sort of thinking the CMA probably will wave this through.
That's my gut feel.
I don't think they're going to do what Boya Ekholm suggested in his little LinkedIn update on it, where he said wave it through quickly and don't attach any concessions at all, pretty much.
So the CEO of Ericsson decided to publish something on LinkedIn about this deal?
Yep.
And he's basically all for it.
Justification for my piece this morning. He was all for it. I mean, this is interesting in itself, I think, because it's not a big surprise because I've spoken to Ericsson before about consolidation. I mean, they make a big deal about the fact that there's too many operators in Europe and the market would be stronger if mergers were allowed to happen and we had something that's a little bit more like you have in the US or China. And then I sort of said, well, isn't that, I think I can't remember who I was speaking to at the time, maybe it was Frederick Yedling, the head of networks, isn't that bad for Ericsson because you've got fewer networks then to sort of spend money on your equipment,
flog stuff too.
And he was like, well, you could look at it that way, but actually if you have a load of, essentially he was saying if you have a load of networks that aren't really very strong and they're not spending anything at all and their capital intensity is really low, then it's a lot better to have one really powerful
well, they've probably done the math,
to invest. Well, they might have done the maths, but I did the maths as well on the Vodafone.
I'll see your maths and raise it.
And now maybe he's taking a China position where they look to the long-term future and, if we carry on like this with 4 companies in the market, we're just going to kind of gradually fade away and, nothing will ever get spent on mid-band 5G and it'll be a disaster. But the short-term implications for Ericsson, I don't think, of this deal are particularly good any way you look at it because they're the biggest provider, I think the biggest sort of vendor to both those companies. I dug into this a bit this morning with Three, and I already sort of knew it from Vodafone from various sessions that we've been at where they've talked about the network side of things. But Three's network is basically moving towards having Ericsson as a single source on the radio access network side. They started off as a 3G company, hence the name, doing it with Nokia.
Yeah.
Then they built,
which, as I've joked, was a remarkably short-termist choice of name.
Paddy on the PR side said he was going to watch this, so I better get this right.
Okay.
Otherwise he's going to.
Paddy, sorry for moaning about Three's coverage.
But then they went to Samsung for 4G, and then they took a decision to use Huawei as their 5G radio access network provider, and they very quickly had to change when government restrictions came in, back in 2020, whenever it was, and settle on Ericsson. And what's happening at the moment is basically Ericsson is not only so the 3G network is going to be shut down soon, and Ericsson is not only replacing the Huawei sites that they still have up and running, which is probably not all that many now. It's also phasing out Samsung's 4G stuff. So they're moving towards a position where Ericsson will be the only provider of things continue across all of Three's sites, which is about 17,400 in the UK.
And do you know what Ericsson's status within Vodafone is?
In Vodafone, which has about 18,000 sites, according to sessions that we've been at before, they used to have Nokia in London, and I think bits of the southeast, and then the rest of the network was split between Ericsson and Huawei. But they've been phasing Nokia out, so it's pretty much now just Ericsson and Huawei. And Ericsson accounts for, so they've got this is what I think based on the percentages they've thrown out in the past. 18,000 sites, Ericsson's got about 12,000 of those, if you sort of include the stuff from Nokia that's been moving towards Ericsson. And Huawei has the other 6,000, which are mainly in the west of the UK. Now, as we know, what they're doing with those Huawei sites is 2,500 of them have been earmarked for an upgrade, for a switch to Open RAN, which is mainly Samsung, but using some other companies as well, like NEC. The fate of the other.
Do you know what? I hadn't joined the dots. I knew that Vodafone was focusing on the west of England for Open RAN. I hadn't joined the dots between that and Huawei, but it obviously makes sense. If they're obliged to.
That was their decision after the government decision came in. That they probably wouldn't have done it otherwise, but they have to get rid of Huawei, and they don't. What they don't want to do. They were dissatisfied with Nokia. And they didn't want to have a single vendor network and have just Ericsson.
Yeah.
So what's the alternative? They're going to have to go and do Open RAN. Or they could have brought Samsung in, I suppose. But the trouble with, and this is an issue anyway, I think, with Samsung is how much of a 2G portfolio does it have? It says it has one.
And there is a feeling, correct me, I could be massively oversimplifying or missing the point, but there's a feeling that if you're going to get Samsung involved, you might as well make it Open RAN friendly because that's...
Yeah. But the point is, so you bring those two networks together, right? And Vodafone, by the way, is the controlling shareholder here, and it attaches huge strategic importance at group level to supply diversity, and also attaches huge strategic importance to Open RAN at group level. I think it's very, very hard to imagine that Open RAN plan will change.
Yeah.
Which means that in areas of the West that are currently served or would have been served by Ericsson on Three's network, they're probably going to dismantle Ericsson essentially, ultimately take it out.
Right.
Unless you want to run two parallel networks, which defeats the purpose of a merger, doesn't it?
Totally.
And then across the rest of the country, they're both Ericsson.
So this is to your point about this being bad for Ericsson. So
you're not going to have. I mean, you put the two overlapping footprints together,
yeah,
and they might end up with more than 18,000 sites afterwards because they can probably look at some areas where they have bad coverage as standalone players. But they're not going to have a lot of overlap. They're not going to have 30 or 1,000 sites. They're not going to retain all of those. That number's going to drop quite a lot, which means taking out some equipment, which means the addressable market in that company, that new company for Ericsson's smaller because it's just serving one
100%.
operator now.
No, I think it's impossible to disagree with that. I would imagine that Echo is coming at it from a more strategic point.
And the other point is that he's to his point that big companies, stronger companies spend more.
That was what I was alluding to.
Well, they do, but they don't spend more than the two other ones added together.
Yeah.
So the two other ones added together is £1.5 billion last year, according to their statements. And what they're saying they're going to invest, one of the things they told the CMA to sound really impressive, is 11 billion over 10 years.
Yeah.
But that's
my maths.
But that's 1.1 billion annualized. So that's good to go into one network. That's good. That's better than a network spending 750 million. Yeah. But it's still just one network then. So it's a £400 million difference for the suppliers, basically.
I would have thought the other reason for Echo bothering to go on LinkedIn about
he doesn't want to upset his customers.
Yeah, and so it's a political move.
Yeah, totally.
It's like every time, let's say Trump won the next US election and no one wanted him to win because he's such a nutter.
Yeah.
They're still going to, all the politicians are still going to go, yeah, nice one, Trump, hurrah, because that's a political thing to do.
Yeah. And
so
the other area they've got to worry about as well is the core. So the core network at the moment that's a much, much smaller amount of money, obviously, but still strategically important. And according to the vendors, according to the telcos, it's a business the vendors clearly want to be in. So Ericsson, Vodafone has a Cisco core that it's been moving to Ericsson, basically. And at one of those sessions you were there, I think, with Andrea Donna a few months ago. I seem to remember asking, is the plan to eventually converge everything on Ericsson's core? Because you don't want to have two.
Yep.
And he was like, yeah. The trouble is that Three has its own core provider, which isn't the same company. It's Nokia. They're like pretty much all in with Nokia. And they spent quite a lot of time and effort on moving systems onto that Nokia platform. So unless they want to have two separate core networks across this new look Threedafone or whatever we're going to call it, they're going to have to get rid of one of them.
I think Threedafone's better than Voda 3.
Or just V3, I've been calling it.
V3, yeah. Oh, there is that. That's a good point.
One of them is keeping their entire brand in it then.
I think it's just going to be Vodafone, actually, brand-wise.
I think so. So they're calling it, boringly enough, Merge Co. for now.
Well, they always do that because they don't know what to do.
That's just the generic thing. No, V3 is good. Does sound like a bit like a mixed fruit drink, a mixed vegetable juice drink. Was that V8?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like a shitter version of that. It's only got carrots and tomatoes and celery and that's it. It's like halfway between that and a Bloody Mary mix.
Isn't that an engine as well, a V8?
That's true, yeah.
I think a V3 is like a Russian rocket launcher as well.
Well, V2s are the ones
there was a V1 and V2. Maybe V3 is what Germans would have managed if we'd let them get away with it. So there's all sorts of problems with that name, Ian.
Yeah, well... I think it'll just be Vodafone.
Coded references to World War II rockets. It probably will just end up being Vodafone, I agree. I mean, it is the stronger brand. And also, it's not got a legacy reference to a mobile phone technology that's 2 generations old.
Yeah, totally, yeah.
I think 3's a shit name.
But
anything except a number.
Phasing out 3 is that it's quite for people like Pierre, who's considerably younger than either of us, then
considerably.
He's catching up though.
Yeah,
he's closing the gap.
Yeah,
it's quite. I don't know. It seems to mean more to young people, that brand, perhaps.
3.
Yeah.
Maybe it does. Maybe again,
some
if Paddy's listening, sorry, it's not a shit brand. I just think a number as a name for a company just doesn't do a lot for me.
Yeah.
Oh, but if it's any consolation, Paddy, I think EE's a shit brand as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it's only slightly less shit than saying everything everywhere.
I remember that video of Ray when they announced that he was like, it's not going to work. It's just like...
I mean, originally they spelt it out. They called it everything everywhere. And I was just like, what's that supposed to mean? Everything everywhere.
6 syllables.
Yeah.
It's too long.
Yeah. I even wrote a piece when I was at Hexus. I even wrote a sort of early attempt at satire. I was trying to imagine the brainstorming. Going, okay, so what are we all about? He goes, well, you know, we cover quite a lot of stuff. And we want to give people quite a lot of stuff.
All at once.
So let's call it quite a lot of stuff for quite a lot of people. And they go, no, we're not aiming high enough. Fuck it, everything everywhere. Yeah, all right, yeah, let's have that. Yes, so there's a rich history. Vodafone had Vodafone 360. There's a rich history of telcos having a go at branding and just arsing it up.
Yeah. So I think the other thing that's interesting on the concessions front is the spectrum side of things, which I've not actually looked into much. You could easily look into it. I just haven't really had the time this week. But you could look at what they will end up with if you.
You don't keep a spreadsheet of.
I do. I just haven't had time to. I just haven't had time to do it. I
think it's not like you to not have a spreadsheet, mate.
I do have a spreadsheet, but it's. I would imagine that they're going to be. Is it BT? BT and Three seem to be the most spectrum rich, I guess, in the country. Or is it?
Yeah,
really, yeah.
Three.
But three
got a lot higher.
Huge amount of high band and mid band spectrum.
Mid band and high band.
And I'm kind of wondering what the implications of that. If you add Vodafone's mid band holdings,
so I think the lower band, like the sort of around the 1 gig level, which is the primo spectrum, I think it's quite evenly distributed. Because EE, don't forget EE, when EE first launched on 4G, when it had a big advantage over everyone else, it's because it was allowed to refarm 1800, wasn't it?
But I think this is one of the reasons maybe Boy is sort of rubbing his hands and grinning back in Stockholm or wherever he is at the moment, because if that I think he goes backwards and forwards between them. Shista, yeah, except spelled with a K. What's that all about? But he's probably thinking. I mean, the thing that Ericsson really wants to see is companies spending a huge amount of money on mid-band 5G, because those radios, I think, are more expensive, aren't they? Those kind of high performance.
I don't know. I'll take your word for that.
Well, I think those high performance massive MIMO ones that you put in city centres and you run on 3.5 gigahertz spectrum, and you need lots of them.
Because you need to
because
they've got shorter range.
Is the kind of lucrative opportunity for Ericsson. So he's probably thinking, let's look at how things look spectrum wise. After this merger, if there's no concessions, which is what he's saying to the CMA, don't attach any concessions to this.
But I'm pretty sure the combined company, like to get back to what you're alluding to. And by the way, quick tangent. I've just opened up some Two Tribes, which is part of the John Strand legacy.
Nothing to do with Frankie Goes to Hollywood.
No. Well, that does make me think of that. But this is what they were serving on the Eurostar on the way back. Do you remember? In fact, I've still got one in my fridge that I nicked and we didn't get around to drinking, so I just took it home. And I've got to say, it's a decent one, and fair play to Eurostar for having a decent like indie IPA.
Yeah.
So that still doesn't exonerate them from being 3 hours late, but it's something, isn't it?
Yeah.
So back to your point, it seems likely. And if we were to look at your spreadsheet, we'd probably ought to confirm this, that the combined Vodafone and Three is going to have probably more of the primo around the 1 gigahertz spectrum than the other two.
Yeah.
Whether it'll be a ridiculous amount. As you say, a lot of Three stuff is higher.
Yeah.
Frequency, which is less valuable.
But I think they have a lot of mid-band, a lot of that sort of...
Yeah, they have a lot of mid-band. But I mean, Vodafone will have plenty of low band. Three will have a decent amount.
Yeah.
I think between the two of them... in fact, saying the word decent amount reminded me of the pod last week when what's his name again? Bloke we had on last week.
Charlie.
Blanking. Charles Miller. There we are. Sorry, Charles. Yeah. It's just I'm getting old, mate.
Charles Miller, not Charlie.
And as you kindly pointed out, Charles, I'm drinking too much beer and it's making me senile. Yeah, when I was trying his Sierra Nevada, I went, "Oh, that's decent, that is."
Yeah.
And he had to translate as to is that good or not.
Yeah.
And anyway, he put the pod up on LinkedIn. And he said he thought he got both the person and the quote wrong. He said, "I think Ian said it wasn't bad. It was not bad." And I went, "No, it was me that said it was decent." But yeah, so they'll have a big, and so there's lots of considerations. I think back to whether or not it will go through, and we should probably sort of, well, leaving it to you if you've got any other things you want to say about this on the whole. I think it'll go through, but there'll probably be quite a lot of strings attached. Yeah. Partly because I think they have to be seen to be attaching strings just to let it go through.
Well, I think the spectrum side of it to me is if they don't do anything there, it's a bit of a nonsense really, because you're automatically creating a huge imbalance in them. Spectrum seems to be there's such a huge amount of importance attached to spectrum. Well, there was essentially the only thing that differentiates operators from.
And there was some quote, I don't know if you just came up with it, that maybe someone was talking about how operators, they're primarily just spectrum owners.
They're spectrum owners.
That's their main business model.
This is one of the barriers to entry, really. I mean, you talk about,
over and above the CapEx.
You obviously need money to put the base stations up, but there's no reason why someone with deep pockets couldn't do that. But if they don't have the licenses and they don't own the spectrum, and they always get handed out to the same companies, let's be honest, this whole auction process is a crock of shit. It's just a joke. A proper auction, you walk into a room and anybody can bid for a painting, and you don't have to be.
Well, they whittle down who's allowed to contribute in the
totally, but it always ends up with the same four companies.
Yeah,
we know it does. It never changes, and any new entrant that comes along walks off with a sliver or doesn't succeed and backs out.
Well, one of the reasons Three's got the spectrum it did because it bought a company that.
Well, I think things are a bit different then. Back in the days.
But it bought a company
3G.
that owned some. I think it was Three.
Yeah, I mean, the 3 came into the market back in the days of 3G licensing when the valuations attached to these companies were very different and they were spending a lot differently and they weren't the plodding sort of utility-like businesses that they are these days. So I think it's much more of a, and people like me complain about spectrum auctions all the time. You see countries. The other way of doing this is to not have spectrum auctions, but actually just to sort of attach obligations and a nominal fee. But the trouble with doing that is you're almost sort of entrenching the players that are already there.
You're still picking winners in so much as who you're allowing to participate.
It's a very difficult one to know how to solve. But the problem is, I think if they allow them to merge and don't do anything on the spectrum side of things, there's automatically you've got a massively skewed market then. I mean, there's already concerns about this creating, it will create a 3-player market and maybe there's consequences for pricing and consumers, and should we be worried about that? And that's the sort of thing the CMA is going to look at. But I'd be very, very surprised if they don't come along and say, well, you should give up some of your spectrum assets. I think that's one thing that they should definitely be required to do to try and level things out.
And then what would happen? Would they be recycled through another auction?
I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. But it needs to be, to me, those spectrum assets that companies have need to be more evenly distributed than they are.
Well, that's definitely a story for you to write and me to just rip off. Is work out exactly what the combined company would have in spectrum. Compare that to the other two.
I'll do that next week.
Oh, make it so number one. So and so it'll probably go through. They said they expect it to be done by the end of next year, so it could take 18 months. I would be surprised if it takes that long. One of the things that we've tried to do since we left Europe, sorry, Mary Noel, is be a bit quicker.
Yeah.
One of the things that I diss Europe about a lot is how slow it is. I mean, there are some upsides to it being slow. Like, I won't go on about this now, but there's been a few things Europe's come out. Well, one of them we're going to talk about next, but it's also having a go at Google over its advertising. And, one thing Europe does is it's exhaustive. It takes a while, but it will dot all the I's, cross all the T's, and it'll you're not going to catch it out for a lack of detail, lack of attention to detail. But I think we we had this with another, I think with the VMO2 thing. Europe was sitting on it and they were having another bottle of wine and just sort of thinking, well, I don't know. Or perhaps more likely it being Europe, I don't know, or whatever a German accent sounds. I don't know how to do a German accent without it sounding like some piss-take war film type of thing.
Do that.
Yeah. So I'll just leave it there. I get to practice French accent listening.
Avoiding German accents, I think, is a good policy move.
Generally enacting that problematic episode of 40 Towers. Yeah, that's how I won't do an accent. I'll just stick my finger on
the entire Hello series.
Yeah. All right, I'll leave it there. I'll put the xenophobia on the back burner for now. With the VMO2 thing, Europe was sitting on it in whatever accent it chose to sit on it. And then when we fully left Europe, and we know that was a protracted process, but when it's finally done, then our lot got on with deciding on VMO2 pretty quickly. And by the way, talking about VMO2, I've just remembered what the little tangent that I wanted to mention was. They've got a marketing initiative where, when you get a postpaid, like a full contract, where it's like a 2-year contract, and you get a phone chucked in with it. So let's say you got your new iPhone, it's 60 quid a month.
Yeah, I saw them made a big deal about this a few weeks
exactly.
ago. Yeah.
And they're right to make a big deal out of it, because if basically a bundled postpaid contract is basically a combination of the service contract and financing for the handset, because most people haven't got £1,000 or so to drop on a new iPhone, just straight up. And the financing, if you look at the total cost of ownership, I used to do this back when I was an analyst, total cost of ownership of that financing, it'd be much, much better for you to just get a personal loan, buy the handset, and then get a SIM-only deal.
But people don't work that out.
People don't work that out, and it's easier to just go, they're just thinking, I just want the payoff, I just want to have the new shiny thing.
It's better to get your company to pay for it.
Well, there we are. That's a good call. I'm noted. But what VMO2 is banging on about is, let's say you've got your 60 quid a month 2-year contract, at the end of which you've definitely paid off the cost of the handset.
Yeah.
They're saying, I don't know how true this is, they're saying that their competitors, especially EE, let that roll over.
Yeah.
So let that over into month 25. You're still paying 60 quid when you paid off the phone.
They do.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm on those contracts and have been for a long time, ever since I've been an EE customer. And the only time I've ever had anything to tell me that I'm coming off contract and it's an option to go onto a SIM-only plan and pay less, interestingly, came this year after VMO2 started that campaign.
Was it before or after you baked?
Which wasn't even, and the really weird thing was, it wasn't even a phone call or an email communication or anything through the app that they have. It was a letter through the post.
Yeah.
Saying, your plan is...
They did a little mystery shopper thing and they found that EE was the worst. I mean, to their annoyance, although their PR people would insist they weren't annoyed and all they want is for everyone to get a better deal and they've got no vested interest or marketing interest.
Of course not.
No, of course not. Bless them. But, to what was presumably their annoyance, you can handle that. You can handle a gamma ray. It's only 5.5%. Believe me, mate, I was going through half of the Strand legacy, and there were loads of them that were well over 6%.
Really?
Yeah, I got scared because I'm meeting a mate later.
How many beers have we got? About 30?
Well, we're getting through them, but we still got loads. But just a lot of them are 6+%. I know I'm hard, but it's only 3:30. It's a hell of a time to start on the 6.5%.
Have you got a big session planned?
Well, I'm just meeting up with a mate, and I haven't seen him for years, so it's likely to
go on
for a bit. Just got to pace it.
Yeah, fair enough.
Line my stomach by speed eating that sushi when I arrived. So anyway, just to put that tangent to bed, I think that's a point well made. And if he is currently doing a bad job of that, then they should be shamed. But it does turn out, it looks like Vodafone 3 actually aren't that bad. They had a mystery shopper and went round shops and on websites. Turns out Vodafone and 3 are all right now. It's just EE, according to VMO2, that's shit. Anyway,
so
that's that
VMO2
tangent.
actually said Vodafone and 3 are not that bad.
Yeah.
But EE's really crap.
Which they get credit for, because if they're sending out this thing where they've obviously got an agenda, which is we're lovely and they're not. But then they did have to make the concession, and they didn't have to mention it. They could have they could have put it as a little footnote, and there were some footnotes. But they did have to go that actually Vodafone was pretty much all right in terms of offering. They call them split contracts.
Right.
So what they're looking for is for people to offer you these unbundled contracts.
Okay.
Or I suppose at the very least make it explicitly clear. I mean, all they need to do, I put it in my concluding paragraph. Actually talking about their ulterior motive, my whole paragraph started, obviously companies don't invest time and money in projects like this without an ulterior motive. VMO2 is presumably hoping some media will take its narrative at face value. Let's me have a little dig at other journalists, because they'll have a whole thing, what they call the whole thing. By the way, VMO2, when you're trying to maintain that you don't have an agenda, then why did you call the whole thing, they call it something like, the smartphone swindle.
That's it.
Yeah, do you know what I mean? I mean, they're trying to make it sound like some 60s Michael Caine film or something. Yeah. You're only supposed to blow the bloody doors off.
That would have been good if they got Michael Caine in their advertising, I think, for that.
You are taking the piss. Charge them less.
That's got to get into the intro.
So I said, VMO2 is presumably hoping some media will take its narrative at face value, resulting in a marketing win. In practice, it looks like only EE needs to significantly raise its game on this matter, which it could easily do by announcing it will now automatically charge postpaid customers less when they reach the end of their bundle contract.
I don't really like this
as simple as
VMO2 trying to be the sort of arbiter of what's good and what isn't in the market, you know?
Yeah, it's all a little bit...
I mean, Virgin Media certainly on the cable side has not exactly got the
I think that's been
reputation for customer service.
I think that's been one of the things that's been thrown back at them.
Yeah.
I mean, but the point by itself is valid. But my point at the end that all EE's got to do is when you get to the end of the 24th month, they go, congratulations, you're now only paying 30 quid a month, or you can get a new phone.
Yeah, and as I say, the only time that's ever happened with me was with a tablet that I've been paying on for a 4G connection for a while for my youngest son, and
right.
And they contacted me about that through a letter.
Have we had this chat? Have you not chatted to them about tethering?
Yeah, I know.
We have had this chat.
We have had this chat, but I did it because stupid.
All right, fair enough.
Stupid move, but anyway, it doesn't happen.
Don't make a habit of it.
It's been cut, so it's just a Wi-Fi based iPad now. But it does have a 4G chip in it if we want to start it off again, obviously, which probably won't ever happen. But the phone that I'm using, which I did upgrade to an iPhone 14, so I've stayed on the whole subsidies thing.
And that's fine. If every 2 years you want a new phone,
they never told me about that. They never said you can go SIM only now.
Well, some people want to sweat their assets.
Mm.
I mean, you used a. What was that? Are you saying
me.
Like me?
Yeah.
I just saw it at the corner of my eye.
They don't want to pay 70 quid a month when they don't have to, do they?
Well, quite. And if you're happy to use a 2.5-year-old phone, then fuck it. I mean, they're still perfectly good.
I mean, the thing is that if you come off those subsidy plans and you go down to spending, say, 25 quid a month, you can always go back onto a subsidy plan again anyway. So you just worse off spending 70 quid a month. You actually, it's almost, this is where I kind of slightly sympathise with the VMO2 thing, the smartphone swindle. It is a bit dodgy, really, to keep taking.
I agree with VMO2. Disregarding their motives for doing it.
You paid it off, and they're still charging you 70 quid, and you can get the same thing for 30. It's
no
pretty
doubt.
Bad.
It's definitely a piss take, and EE, you need to race a game.
Unfortunately, it shouldn't be for VMO2 to be doing things like this. It should be to those useless tossers called Ofcom. This is the sort of thing they can actually...
Ofcom probably listens to this.
Well, they're good.
I don't think you're useless tossers.
They're useless tossers. They could do something on that, and the other thing they could have done something on is, we're all going to increase our prices by exactly the same formula that we've come up with of 11 point whatever % plus inflation. Which works out to be 14 point whatever % in everybody's case. In every case, they've done the same thing. I mean, to me, that's and that's one thing. If I was a mainstream journalist working for the Telegraph or the Times or the Daily Mail or whatever it might be, I'd have dug into that a lot more than any of them.
So maybe they're the useless tossers.
They're the useless tossers, and Ofcom's a useless tosser for not actually investigating.
Everyone is except us and Pierre.
Totally. Yeah.
All right. We should move on. So another thing that came out just today, Andrew wrote it up for us, but he and I had a chat about it, and it's relevant to 2 pods ago when we had a strand of carrier bags full of beer on.
Yeah.
He's
been hassling me about it all week.
Yeah, I know. Well, he sent us both an email, didn't he, just now? But
I was on the phone with him last night, and he didn't particularly like my pre-announcement coverage of the topic.
Pre-announcement coverage of this topic that I'm about to bring up. Okay, well let's talk about the topic first before we allude to it, which is that the European Union has about 3.5 years ago, early 2020. Yeah, right. That's 2.5 years ago. My math.
2020 it would have been.
Early 2020, yeah, January.
Pretty sure it would have been there, because that's when the UK was making noises and
Yeah, came out with this thing called the 5G Toolbox.
Which is a manual for technicians setting up base stations.
Exactly. You got to fold tab A into slot B, and it was their initial go. Bear in mind that the start of 2020 was when a lot of the we've got to have Chinese vendors not in networks was really kicking off.
Yeah.
And it was their first approach, which was felt like a bit of a fudge. It was more like a set of guidance, a set of sort of best practice, but there was no mandates in it really.
Yeah.
It's just like, perhaps don't have too much Huawei in your core or whatever.
Yeah, well, John denies that.
Right.
And this is the thing. This is a problem I have.
Am I going to get in trouble with John from what I just said? Sorry, John.
But
the beer's already here. You can't take it back.
This is the problem I have with this whole EU approach to this. Is that Thierry Breton came out and said we came out with this toolbox and nobody's done anything.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, why do you expect
very,
them to do anything? You didn't tell anybody that.
Thierry Breton with his massive haircut.
Yeah.
Have you seen how big his hair is?
Well, he's so petite to the rest of him as well,
right.
isn't it? That it probably he's like
he's more hair than man.
Yeah, but they didn't really, I totally agree with you. It's very, very vague, the 5G toolbox. It basically went, you shouldn't really be using high-risk vendors without naming, as far as I'm aware, the high-risk vendors.
Well, they would have to pussyfoot around it, although they're getting a bit more direct now. They're getting a bit more direct now.
Well, he mentioned them in his speech this week. He actually specifically named them after using the expression high-risk
Which is
vendors.
Huawei and ZTE.
But the problem is that they didn't do what the UK government did, which was to say very firmly, you must be at 35% by January, whatever.
No,
and you must be at 0% by end 27, by December the 31st, 2027. They didn't do it. They just said you shouldn't really be using them, kind of thing.
Yeah. So to bring our audience up to speed with the news announcement we're talking about, and then by all means get back into the analysis.
Yeah.
So they've now come up with like 5G Toolbox V2.
Yeah. Which is equally vague.
Well, which
it sounds stroppier without actually any mandates either.
That's the way I would characterise it. They're definitely raising the temperature, and they're coming up with
Well, instead of John seems to think this is a big deal.
And he's sent out research.
They've said
he did link to our podcast again at the bottom of his research.
But the thing he seems to think is a particularly big deal is that the EC has said it won't be buying anything from companies that they must be absolutely terrified. All that work that they get from the EC, all that connecting those government buildings in Brussels.
I'm going to go somewhere between you and John on that, because I take your point that, so we don't get to flog stuff to Brussels.
That 30 million that we get each year from doing that little job.
What John might be alluding to is there are sort of seismic waves. There are knock-on effects from that.
Yeah, I agree,
So basically, the other day we were chatting. I think we were chatting. At the event that I'm going to mention as our final segment, and we were chatting to our colleague Teresa, and we were talking about the eco stuff and how you got scope 1, scope 2 and scope 3. And scope 3 is where your suppliers and just these sort of endless ripples of your ecosystem have to be green as well for you to tick the scope 3 box. I think maybe that's what happens with this. There's just this ripple effect of like...
Yeah, I take that point.
Yeah.
You don't want to be upsetting the EC and also if you're trying
because then you can't work with someone who works with them and then there'll be this degrees of separation.
But I still feel, here's the problem I have with it, is that John seems to think this is going to create this sort of trigger effect where all of a sudden people start to swing into line and we very, very quickly see the end of Huawei in European countries. And I'm really not convinced, The statement they came out with, the update to the toolbox, which we got, you had Andrew write about it, I had Anne do an update on it this morning. If you look at it, and they go, there's 27 countries in the EU, 10 have paid some attention to what we said. Yeah. But then you dig into it.
Some of them are on naughty step.
You dig into it, and it's like, actually, even out of the 10 that have introduced, what they mean is 10 have said something legally. Right. And then if you dig into that bit, 5 have actually done something about it. Who are those 5? They're countries like Estonia and Lithuania and Denmark.
And the irony is the one that's probably done the most is the one that decided to get the fuck out of Dodge.
Exactly. And the biggest one, by the way, the very biggest one, hasn't done anything at all.
Which is Germany.
And
John made that perfectly clear on the pod.
And this is the thing, is I
wonder how good Denmark has been. Is Denmark good?
I'm not sure, to be honest, with what the situation in Denmark. But I'm just not convinced that tomorrow or next week we have a situation where the German government goes, here's the real problem. When the UK did it and they said they had this long consultation with operators. And what was the upshot of all this? We're going to ban it. Well, banning it doesn't really mean banning it, does it? It means in 7 years' time, you can't have it there.
Which is reasonable. You can't ban it tomorrow.
Right. And remember when that happened, 5G was only just started to be rolled out. Germany's now built, all those operators have built really extensive 5G networks with Huawei heavily involved in them.
All of them, all operators then?
All 3 operators use Huawei. All three of the main operators. The only one that doesn't is 1&1, which basically doesn't have a network.
Yeah.
And there's a few sites. All the others use it to varying degrees, but they all use Huawei, and they all have very, very extensively deployed 5G networks, lots of sites.
Yeah.
So I got a hold of a Barclays research note this week. That was my I knew this was coming out, this toolbox update. So my preemptive story on it was kind of quite heavily based on that Barclays research note. They put the swap out costs now at 2.5 billion.
Wow.
To get all the Huawei equipment out and basically change it. And also don't forget that to do it quickly is, in a country that big, it will be incredibly disruptive. You remember those comments that the UK operators are coming out with about how disruptive it would be. It would lead to blackouts. You've got to stagger it, which the authorities paid attention to. Otherwise, they wouldn't have given them till the end of 2027. So does anyone seriously think that Germany's going to go, you can't use Huawei in 2 years' time? Of course they bloody are. They're going to say Huawei has to be, if the most they're going to do is Huawei's going to have to be out of the network by 2030 or something, which is when 6G is coming along.
Not that we expect a massive hardware overhaul. It's with 6G anyway.
They just couldn't. There's no way. There's no realistic way, unless the government wants to foot the bill, which apparently gets into all sorts of issues to do with state aid, according to John.
Yeah. No, we've got strict rules.
I just don't see how.
That's how come we think we got the moral.
I don't see how they could ever get Huawei out of Germany's networks in a very quick.
And so that's where it's going to be a really interesting showdown. So a senior exec at a European telco group that will remain nameless strongly indicated to me that sometimes the EU can get very fucking arsey towards even very senior telecoms execs. And, you know, the kind of tone that people like Thierry Breton and Margarita Vestager adopt is could be very supercilious and very domineering. And you can tell his tone is very much like these countries have been naughty.
Yeah.
And if they don't do what they're told, they'll be in trouble, which is part of my bias against the EU. I've just always perceived the EU that way, as this unaccountable, massive, constantly expanding bureaucracy that thinks it can just tell everyone else what to do, even big multinational companies or entire countries. But then one of my other digs at the EU is I think it's largely serves German and French and maybe their immediate sort of satellite states like Benelux countries, their interests.
Yeah. Which is why it won't do anything that's
so that's what's going to be really interesting, because if people like Vestager and Breton are going, Germany, sort it out, and Germany's going, okay, where are we going to find this 2.5 billion?
Yeah.
Something's got to give, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see what Breton expects Germany to do in a hurry. That's my big point on this. I just don't see 5G. They reckon every technology generation's around for 10 years before the next one comes along, usually. Yeah. I mean, obviously, they live for longer than that.
But I'll stress again that nobody expects there to be a massive swap out of kit with 6G. Especially
that's true.
Yeah.
Nobody does expect that, and they live for a lot longer.
Especially with all the software defined. But
I could see them maybe going. I mean, I'm looking at the way the UK did this, and it's 5G had only just started. It's a smaller country, slightly. It was 2020 when they introduced the rules, and they said end 2027. They thought it was the fairest thing and the most.
And so there's a natural obsolescence cycle where when they were going to replace anyway.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're now in 2023. A lot of equipment's been deployed very, very quickly. That's new equipment that have to be torn out quickly. I just can't realistically see them imposing a ban that comes into force before the late 2020s, 2030. I really can't see how they do it do it before then.
And I think that's something.
So this is where I'm. I mean, I don't like the idea of these unelected bureaucrats coming up with these rules that when national governments are trying to sort of shape their own thoughts on things as well, in the same way that you have reservations about that. I think that's a valid point. But if they'd really wanted to weigh in and make it, they do pass legislation, yeah. They do say your bananas have to be this long and shaped this way. It's just France.
That's the classic. It's just Daily Mail.
France doesn't pay any attention to it. In the same way they don't put.
Well, that was also actually, as a little tangent, that was something that was also hilarious about the UK's relationship with Europe, is we did seem to lack cynicism and savvy.
Yeah.
Everyone else would just nod to it and then do what the fuck they wanted, whereas we get our panties in a bunch
they
over
come
every
out
little
with
rule.
laws, and people don't really pay a lot of attention to some of those laws. They're very picky about them. On this issue, they've not come out with anything at all. They've not been very firm. I mean, I spoke to John. I mean, maybe he'll watch this podcast, but I had a discussion with him on the phone last night, and one of his arguments is that the operators themselves should have taken more responsibility, and that he's not very sympathetic towards these companies for continuing to buy when EU toolbox warnings are coming out. And I said to him on the phone, I said, operators do. You look at all the chip companies in China, like Nvidia and Micron and Qualcomm, that sell huge. Applied Materials is another one, or ASML in the Netherlands, that sell huge amounts of equipment to China, and don't think about geopolitics and don't think about things like that. They just want to make money. They in the same conversation we had the other day about eco. You mentioned Theresa, when we were talking about eco stuff. I'm cynical of things like that because companies are set up to make money for shareholders. That's what they do.
Yeah.
They will make decisions. Obviously, you don't want to buy from a supplier that you think is going to go out of business, because that's a bad business decision. But everybody piled into Huawei in the 2010s because they thought it was a good. They didn't think this is a Chinese company. It's a totalitarian state. Maybe we should worry about.
Yeah, we don't give a shit. I mean, I was just talking about Saudi Arabia earlier, but.
Should they not have done that?
And we'll do business with Saudi Arabia when it suits us. We'll do business with any country.
But the point is, it's not up to operators to make ethical decisions about who to buy from based on it being a Chinese state that might go to war with Taiwan in the future. I
personally don't think business and ethics have anything in common with each other. I'm not saying that in an ideal world they wouldn't. I'd love it if they did. But I think in practice, when you look at the incentives that go on, the incentives are all about profitability and revenue and that sort of thing.
The only where I'd sympathise a bit with John is that maybe if I was a German operator, if I was Timotheus Herges, who's the head of Deutsche Telekom back in 2020 when this was going on, maybe I'd have thought to myself, I can see where I can see where this is going.
I was just going to say that. I was going to go. I'm slightly closer to John's position precisely from what you just said. Read the writing on the wall. Read the signalling.
Do something about it. Yeah. Because otherwise,
I mean, it'd be a bit disingenuous of them to act all surprised. No.
But I still think companies' actions are. Unless you come out with something really hard and legislative, then things like this really are. They're the decisions that need to be taken by governments at government level, and he was naive to think perhaps that it was not going to end up with some stronger pushback.
So that's the interesting thing about this European Union position, and in fact about the dynamics of the European Union in general. You look at the states. If you get to know how the states is governed, it's called the United States of America because it's 52 states, but then a federal government. But there is a much larger degree of autonomy for each state than there is for, let's say, a local council in the UK. Yeah. And the boundaries between what's federal and what's state are quite clearly defined. Granted, the federal reach has grown and grown and grown over history. Whereas in Europe, we've got this much more nascent thing, and the United States was created in
76, I think.
Yeah. And
someone from America can correct.
Yeah, and so they've had 250 years to sort their lives out on that. So we've got this nascent United States of Europe, which obviously doesn't happen overnight. And I actually don't have a problem with the concept. This is one of the things, when I get people like Mary Noel giving me dirty looks for saying I'm a leaver, I often don't feel I get the chance to point out the nuance of it, which is that the underlying point of a United States of Europe, the underlying point of that sort of national collectivism where we're greater than the sum of our parts, I sort of agree with. I just think the way it is structured is, one, unaccountable, and two, skewed in favour of some countries to the detriment of others. If it was a perfect thing where there were meaningful elections for who runs it, and I felt that every country was represented, perhaps in proportion to the size of its population or GDP or some combination therein, then fine, but I never felt it was. Anyway, but the interesting thing about this is, like, in the United States of America, you don't have major standoffs between states and the federal government because they've sort of worked it out. Yeah. There's very rarely a time. I mean, this actually did, funnily enough, I'm going to slightly contradict myself because this did happen a little bit during the COVID and the lockdowns. You had states like Florida with Ron DeSantis that he's dining out on his presidential run. They were going, "No, fuck it, we're gonna let people go out and get pissed."
Yeah.
Whereas you get New York or whatever locking everyone down.
Yeah.
And the federal mandate was to lock everyone down, but some states did rebel. But there doesn't seem to be a big standoff. Whereas what seems to be being set up here is a massive battle of wills between the biggest member state, Germany, and the overarching bureaucracy and supposed overarching authority, which is the EU. And it could be, they'll have to sort it out. I would never bet on the EU like collapsing. It will be there forever. But just like with other crises they've had, like, for example, with Greece, like 15 years ago, or whatever, something's got to give.
Well, I could see it collapsing if you had a situation where, you've already had the UK pull out, obviously. If you had a situation where someone like Marine Le Pen came into power in France and held a referendum on it, and it went the same way that the UK one did.
Well, that would be an issue.
I think that would be the end of the EU. Because the two big members of the EU, let's be honest, are Germany and France. They're the two big sort of voices inside.
Yeah, although, if Italy's one that sometimes threatens to leave. I think they get bribed enough that they wouldn't do it.
You could quite easily see Italy, maybe they get bribed enough, but you could see the referendum in Italy going a similar way. So it would only take two big countries to go, we don't want to be a part of this anymore.
Yeah.
And I think the whole thing would fall apart, to be quite honest with you.
Well, I actually think, this is a tangent, I think they've probably learnt their lesson from Brexit, which is, another reason why I was happy to vote to leave is, do you remember just before David Cameron went over there and went, oh, come on, throw me a bone. Chuck us a bit of fucking brie or some
I want the whole thing
bratwurst
to fall apart,
and
to be honest.
to keep us in.
Yeah.
And they didn't even do that. There was there was no a la carte Europe.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I think if it happened again, if it looked like Italy was going to go, or Marine Le Pen got voted in, or some Eastern, or Hungary, where's Orban? He's Hungary, isn't he?
Yeah.
One of these sort of more spiky
they
Eastern
don't
Europe
like
ones.
This is the thing, but they're big countries as well.
But I think the biggest lesson they've learnt for Brexit is that they would find a way of compromising in a way they didn't with us.
Maybe they would, but my wish is that the whole thing falls apart, to be honest with you.
Why is that?
Now that we're not in it, I think it would be better for us for it not to exist. Because then you wouldn't have this EU versus Britain thing that goes on all the time.
But I think that's chilling out. I think that was priced in. That was inevitable. I think we had to be punished for leaving. If only, I think this might be Voltaire. There's a French word, pour encourager les autres. In other words,
to encourage others. But
and it was from
You mean décourager, like discourage, or?
No, pour encourager. The quote.
Encourage
I can't remember. I can't remember who the French author, Camus or Voltaire, someone like that. But the context was why did some admiral in a military environment got killed, and they went, why did you kill him?
Minorca.
There we are. And they went, why'd you kill him? And they went, to encourage the others. In other words, you got to kill an admiral every now and then to keep the others honest. Yeah. And I think they had to make an example of us just to signal to everyone else it's going to go badly for you if you leave.
Yeah, but
I think that's petering out now. I think we're chilling out.
But I think if it fell apart, then we could maybe get back to what it should have been all along at the beginning of all this, which is
the trading block,
and not this sort of supranational thing.
I obviously completely agree with you on that. The mission creep is what annoys me. While it was just the EEC and all that sort of thing, as soon as you got currency union without political union, that was always a tough one.
Yeah, that was a stupid idea, as everybody realises.
Yeah, and the people who suffered the most were the southern, like the bubbles.
We're on a bit of a tangent again.
Yeah, we are. Okay, have we done that? So basically, long and short of it is, they have said you better get rid of Huawei and ZTE.
Yeah,
but they still haven't gone so far. Like I urged Andrew when he's writing it to put ban in the headline, because they haven't said the word ban, but the sum total of all their messaging amounts to ban. They're basically saying, get the fuck on with getting them out of your networks. That's basically a ban.
Yeah.
The question is, what are they going to do about it if the Germans go, nah?
Yeah. Which is why I still feel it's kind of, a bit toothless, really.
I'm choosing between a Kona Big Wave and a Blue Moon Belgian
White. Who does a beer called Kona Big Wave? Where's that from? Is it like Hawaii
I think. I'm going to have it now that you've flagged it up. Yeah, they got some Hawaii 5.0 artwork on the front. People like going da-da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah.
Anyway, have we done that then? Have you got anything else to say? Any last messages for Strandy on this subject?
My message for Strand is that I don't think that this is going to lead to the kind of dramatic overhaul that he might be anticipating. I take you, and I push back on a bit on the sort of, the EC saying we're not going to deal with operators that continue to buy from Huawei. And I take your point, and actually take his point that that's maybe stronger than I've made it sound. But I still feel that. I just think it's got to a point now in the countries that have been deploying Huawei, and particularly Germany, which is big and has rolled it out quite extensively. I just think it's got to the point now where you could not get that company out of networks very, very quickly, even if you wanted to.
Yeah,
I just don't see how it could be done in a. It's not like, John always refers to quick swaps that have happened in the past when one company's gone to another, but they all tend to be in relatively small Scandinavian countries. Where maybe the equipment was at a stage where, he's made this point before as well, which he went on about quite a lot back in 2020 when the UK issue was coming up, that a lot of equipment needed to be replaced anyway. So he'd already depreciated it. It was already due to be swapped out. If you've just put stuff in, it's 2 years old.
No, that's completely different situation.
And then you've done it really fast, which Deutsche Telekom claims to have done, and the other two operators as well have not been quite as bold on their claims. But you look at Deutsche Telekom's last annual report, they say 95% of the countries now is covered with 5G, and their only two suppliers are Huawei and Ericsson.
I tell you, that does beg another question to me. So we both agree that they could have taken the signalling in early 2020 as a sign to get in line, and they decided not to. So we could drill down a little bit more on why did they decide not to? They must have got some reassurance from the German government. They're sitting there going, look, we're about to get a bunch of Huawei stuff in. The EU sounding like it's going to give us a hard time over that. What have you got to say, Angela Merkel, or whoever the fuck in charge is?
I can give you the answer to that.
Yeah.
The reason that Germany doesn't want to do anything is because their biggest trading partner
they want to flog
is China.
beamers to China, yeah.
And there was just a statement that just came out, actually, which I referred to in my story this week, from the Germany's federal ministry. Can't remember the actual name of it in German, but the foreign ministry.
It'll be something with far too many letters without a gap in
where
between them.
they said that it was really important to maintain a good trading relationship with China, and they put the value of trade last year at something like 300 billion. And it's basically one of the, it's if not the top one, it's like up there with the USA and like other massive countries. They basically flog. It's not just cars; they flog a shitload of machine tools and stuff to China.
I know it's just easier to say that the whole of the German economy is beamers.
Yeah,
for me,
so it is beamers a lot, but they what they don't want to do is impose a ban on Huawei, where they know that the consequences of that are going to. Look what happened when Sweden banned Huawei and ZTE
and they
from
threw
5G.
Toys out the pram.
And the Chinese made a big fuss about it, and then they went, Ericsson, you're only getting.
And now I bet you couldn't
2% of deals next year.
I bet you couldn't get a Billy bookshelf in China now.
Yeah, and so they're incredibly worried about what happens to the German economy and its exports if they go.
Yeah, and they're trying to sit on the fence. I can't remember whether we spoke to John about this when he was on the pod or when it was after, but.
Well, we did, and he said that's less important than considerations like China invading Taiwan.
Just let me finish. Reminds me of having Strand on saying, let me finish. I made some kind of parallel. Basically, Germany's trying to sort of sit on the fence a little bit.
Yeah.
It's trying to straddle East and West a little bit in terms of trade. And then I made a comparison with it making a bad strategic move when it came to energy and becoming too reliant on Russian gas. And, this could be another example of it being caught in a geostrategic bind where, yes, it wants to flog beamers and machine equipment and fucking bratwurst and whatever to China.
German beer.
Yeah, a bit of Beck's. But they don't mind a bit of Beck's in Shanghai.
Better than Tsingtao.
Remember the Tsingtao we had? It was like 1.5%.
Exactly.
And our friend from Huawei, she still reckons she got pissed off half a can. Anyway, yeah. So they're trying to, and that that sort of sums it up quite well because they're trying to have it both ways. They're trying to have their cake and eat it too. They want to say, okay, we're nice, we'll get on well, we do it the Western way, but we also still want to stay in with China. And I can't fault them for it because China's an enormous market. and it's been growing far ahead of the rate of Western growth for decades, although it's slowing down a little bit now.
Yeah.
We also know that they've got a potentially quite vindictive foreign policy, as like the Australians found during the lockdown when they sort of went, hey mate, maybe that virus came from that fucking lab, and then they stopped. They said, right, we're not buying any more Aussie wine, we're not buying any more Aussie beef. They can be really vindictive about this stuff. But I think what I'm leading up to is they're probably going to have to make a call, and Europe's saying you got to make a call, and this is the call you got to make.
Yeah.
So it'll probably take years to play out, but I think sooner or later they're going to have to get in line, or there's going to be a major problem within the EU.
Maybe. I'll tell you what, it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah.
Now that they've come out with this stronger, stroppier statement.
So that's the final thing I want to say about it. The statement was stroppy, but it still didn't have hard deadlines and parameters on it.
Yeah.
They didn't say, you've got to do this by this date.
Yeah.
They just got a bit more arsey, didn't they?
Yeah, and I'm kind of curious as to why that is, because they do make...
So they're still sitting on the fence a bit as well. That's the thing.
They still make... This is what I don't quite understand. This is what I don't quite get... Maybe I should have asked him this actually yesterday, but if he's watching, he could maybe sort of, chip in at some point next week or whatever and let us know. But why is it that John obviously wants national governments to take a fairly hard line against Huawei and impose restrictions and have it taken out of the networks, but he doesn't seem to have an issue with the EU themselves not introducing a kind of ban, a region-wide ban, which would precipitate that anyway. Because if they don't do that, then governments are just going to go, well, we'll make our own decisions, aren't we?
That's true. So, I mean, I've said that. I said it to John. I said it to John on the pod, and I've said it outside of the confines of the pod. I said, he doesn't do himself any favours, as far as I'm concerned, as an analyst and a commentator, if he seems to have picked a team too much. And I thought he did a great job on the pod, by the way, of justifying why he's picked a team. We challenged him, and he fought his corner very coherently. But if you're going to be really objective and balanced, then you don't just applaud the EU for what it's done, you also criticise it for not doing more.
Yeah.
Which I didn't see in the research note that he sent.
No.
So,
I just think they've been... I still feel that this is a bit toothless, to be honest. If they... let's not get...
It feels a bit superficial,
let's not get into the rights and wrongs of whether they should ban Huawei. If they've decided that they don't want Huawei in the network of any European operator, then why not come out with, in the same way that they're pretty gung-ho about other things to do with farming and whatever.
Yeah.
Why don't they come out with some firm policy that then gets passed down to national governments? Why just go, we recommend that you don't do it?
Yep.
I mean, if you recommend something to me, I don't know about you, but when my dad recommends things to me, sometimes I go, well, if my dad did, you did this, otherwise you're not getting any pocket money for the next year.
If it just goes, I recommend.
But if he goes, I recommend you don't do this, Ian, I might go, well, actually, I'm not
I'll slightly push back. That's the tone I try and take with my son now. My son is 19 now, so you do have a different tone to when they're like 8.
Yeah.
But
maybe
now
that's the best analogy, but
now but it depends on the age. Yeah. But yes, I think and to conclude it, because we haven't got much time left. I think there's a contradiction with the EU because it adopts a quite sort of patriarchal. You weren't keen on that Blue Moon. You just cracked open.
Just a change of taste from.
Yeah, it's a wheat beer, isn't it? And they remember it's the one they normally lob a fruit salad in for reasons best known to them. They adopt this quite strict patriarchal, naughty Germany, do what you're told, but then once you get under the surface of it, it's quite insubstantial, so I completely agree with you on that. All right, let's move on. We only got about 15 minutes left max. So one thing we did this week, and we got to enjoy the nice weather, we went to an event that's run by Informa, which is our employer, called
Future Enterprise Networks.
Future Enterprise Networks, thank you. And that was in central London. And basically, I think it used to be called the Private Networking Event, and they've rebranded it. But the bit I wrote up, which is basically most of the first day that we sat in on, was pretty much all about private networks. And my headline writing it up was experts warn it's still early days for 5G private networks. So I'm going to just get into that angle and ask your thoughts on it. But before I forget, I've got to get a shout out. We went out once we called it a day about 4:00. It was a lovely day in London. We found this place with outdoor seating. We sat down, had some beers, and we were joined by Charlie Ashton from Napatech.
Yeah.
And he was cool. He's telling us all about how he once hitchhiked over the whole of the fucking states, like literally from New York to California. And we had lots of rounds of beer, and our meter was there, and Teresa was there, and your missus was in town. She went and joined us.
Yep.
Magda, that is. And Charlie just covered the whole lot when he left. So thanks, Charlie, and thanks, Napatech. I mean, Charlie might not, if Napatech's accounts department's listen to this, he might not thank me for bringing it up. But, we didn't spend that much. It's just some beers, but it's still very generous of you. Thanks, mate. And I told Charlie he's welcome on the pod as well.
Yeah,
that's all you got to do. All you got to do is buy me a shitload of beers and you come on the pod. I don't care who you are.
He'd be good on the pod, I think.
No, he would be good. He had plenty to say. And he's a good lad. Anglo-American. Anyway, I just thought I'd give that a shout out. But yeah, I'll hand it over to you. That was the vibe I got from the day. Is they're going, private networks. Just to quickly frame it, private networks is basically where you can give someone, as the name implies, you can give someone their own 5G network, but it's constrained. It's got boundaries around it, and only people within your campus, within your business, within a geographical area, or whatever that you determine. It's like a sort of private WAN or
it's
whatever.
It's like a Wi-Fi network, really, isn't it? That
except the thing about it is it's supposed to be even more private and controllable.
Yeah.
And they were, like, when we were at Mobile Congress earlier in this year, and one of our big editorial objectives was like, is anyone making any fucking money out of all this 5G capex? Is there any ROI? And private networks is regularly flagged up along with fixed wireless access as one of the big sort of early use cases. But one thing I got from that event and the various assembled speakers and experts was it's still really early days. There's not a lot of them about. There's not a lot of money in it. It's a bit of a slow burner. Is that the vibe that you got?
Yeah, I think it's a disappointing market, frankly. Private networks, private 5G. I think the whole thing. There's a huge amount of talk about it, and there's not a huge sign that much is actually happening. And it's been like that, I think, ever since 5G came along. And it's been discussed now. I mean, I remember going to Mobile World Congress before 5G had even been launched and talking to operators then who were saying that the main rationale for doing something called 5G at all was to do with the enterprise market. And yet all it's been used for really is providing smartphone connections that are slightly faster that we even notice anyway because it was good enough on 4G.
And that you don't get coverage for most of the time. And that you don't get very good coverage.
And it just really doesn't make any difference to anybody, frankly.
No.
And the whole enterprise thing, I think, it's just been a real disappointment. And
so far,
and the so far is only going to go so far because we're now.
Are we going to get into 26?
We're getting closer to. I mean, I can't believe how quickly this year's gone. We're halfway through this year. It's going to be 2024. Not much is going to have changed in the next 6 months. Let's be honest. We're going to get to. I think this may be one of those markets where we really don't get anywhere until maybe 6G comes along. I mean, we were both at a 6G thing a few weeks ago in Surrey, and they were talking about things like using sensors and quite wacky things like what do they call it? Dual twin.
Digital twins.
Digital twins. Thank you. Sorry, digital twins.
So digital twins, for people who don't know, is basically where you create a digital, i.e., non-real world version of an environment, and then you can fuck about in that digital environment. Obviously with impunity. It's like a sandbox of the real world,
completely,
isn't it?
Yeah. And I wonder whether things like that and the Apple's just come out with its Vision Pro headset, which is
all metaverse.
It's a consumer company and doesn't play much in the enterprise space. But I wonder whether things like that will.
Well, it does increasingly. I mean, if you look at the ubiquity of iPads, in like restaurants and stuff.
Totally. And I wonder, as things like that gain traction with developers, that's going to lead to some kind of excitement in this space, but I still don't think it's going to happen maybe quickly enough for it to be necessarily a 5G thing, or certainly not a thing until the later stages of 5G, what's being called 5G Advanced now. Those later releases when we get kind of new capabilities in. I think the whole thing's just been a real, a bit of a disappointment.
And
I think the problem
in terms of monetization, certainly,
it's a really fragmented market where there's lots of people trying to get in and do things, and it's not clear to me that the operators are going to win that battle. I think it's one area where, I mean, the whole notion of a proper 5G network, a proper private network, because there's various ways of doing it. I mean, the way a lot of the operators want to do it is to actually have something called network slicing, where you carve out a bit of your public network for an enterprise, and it's reserved for them, and
they can pay a premium in order to have some guaranteed service level agreement.
Totally.
Yeah.
But what a lot of enterprises want to do in markets where they've actually even released spectrum to those enterprises is just build their own network and do it with Ericsson or Cradlepoint, which is owned by Ericsson, or another company, and not really have an operator involved at all. I mean, we were talking about Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, I think, before we came on, who bought an interesting company called Athernet.
And Athernet came up several times on that day.
I mean, they do the core. They do core networks that are very suitable.
But they seem to be smashing it with 5G, with private
I mean, this is the reason that HPE bought them. They have a technology that's just really good for that particular enterprise market. And it was doing things that they wouldn't be able to do with Wi-Fi, basically, from my conversations with them in terms of there are things you can do with 5G in terms of coverage and certain other capabilities that you can't do with Wi-Fi. And then you get a company like Athernet that's already done the software and the core network software that's needed for an enterprise deployment. It was much easier for HP to come along and acquire it rather than try and do its own.
And one thing I've got to say for HP broadly, before it split, when because the reason HPE exists is you used to have the whole of Hewlett-Packard, and then it split into its consumer, like those little printers that we've all got at home. Yeah. Although I tend to go with Canon. Sorry. HP.
So there's the shitty bit, and there's the good bit.
There's the like the PCs and the printers and the consumer stuff.
The shitty bit.
And then HPE's enterprise.
It's a good bit. Yeah.
It's a good bit. But HP on the whole has, I remember, just generally being a bit shit at M&A. It's been one of those companies like with Cisco, where they bought stuff.
Yeah.
Or Intel's another good example of this. So they bought stuff and you're a bit like, what the fuck was that all about? And then lo and behold, they end up flogging it at a discount.
Yeah.
But this to be fair, this looks like good. I know it's small M&A,
company,
but it looks like Athernet does seem to be, if the whole point is for them to make themselves a leader in private networks, this seems like an excellent acquisition.
Yeah, totally. And like you said, they turned up a few times on the at the
I think Vodafone and Telia both.
Yeah, so I wrote my one bit of coverage from it, which only went up this morning because just got bogged down in other things. But
Teresa was lazy. It's fine.
Teresa did do some some good write-ups of what was going on in the sessions, and then I did one specific thing because I thought the story about Telia was really interesting, where they're basically doing a private network.
Yeah, and we should talk about that.
Yeah, for the Norwegian Armed Forces, and they're using, as well as having a network slicing offer for the Norwegian Armed Forces to use. So they basically have a slice of the network, the public network that they can. That they take control of, and they have their own sort of guaranteed levels of service on that, and QoS and everything. They were also, Telia's all this bit called Telia Tactical Networks is also kind of developing
tactical networks. That's great.
Yeah, but they're
tactical.
developing.
You just think of Americans packing heat.
Yeah,
when you hear tactical.
But they've come up with like portable base stations basically that you could put on a battlefield, and this is where Athernet comes in.
And they've got a core. They've got their own core.
So there's an Athernet. There's a box at the bottom.
It's much more than a base station. It's a portable network.
The baseband and the core. So it's like an Athernet core, and you put it there, and it doesn't need backhaul, obviously.
And you can sit there and go, bomb those fuckers over there.
Yeah. And I think it has a radius of like 5 kilometers. They were saying they have another one that's doesn't have a core with it. That's a 1 kilometer radius, but they have backhaul provided via Starlink.
So they got two options for backhaul. They've got terrestrial and they got Starlink.
Yeah, but the one with the core, obviously, they don't need to necessarily connect that to the Telia main network.
Well, it depends whether they want it to be a closed or an open network.
But they can, with the Ethernet core, they can just run that as a standalone thing,
as a basically mobile private network.
And I think the interest. I mean, I wrote about this. One of the interesting things about it is where potentially it could go, like a lot of, it's interesting because a lot of technology innovations came out of the military, obviously semiconductors and the internet itself. It's things like this can be taken into other sectors. They were saying that some of these portable base station things could be used in like mining, for instance, perhaps, or even the media. There's this use case for putting a kind of almost a 5G core network in your backpack and running around and being able to do.
Which is funny. It's funny. It's funny. That's almost going back 50, 100 years where they used to carry portable.
You carry a portable network, wireless, and you film stuff, and you can have it completely uploaded straight away. And it's quicker than doing it via satellite. Yeah, I remember EE talking about this a few years ago. Actually, they did a sort of demo in
they always used to sponsor
Wembley.
Glastonbury and shit.
Yeah. So I mean,
tell you one thing before you move on from the Telia thing.
Yeah.
One thing to flag up, and I know you noted this. So the Telia guy talked about all this stuff, and I think one thing he said, I'm just looking at my write-up, he said using commercial rather than proprietary technology has got lots of benefits around availability and interoperability.
Yeah.
But then obviously using commercial rather than proprietary tech has security implications, which are particularly profound for military uses. And he just sort of went, yeah, don't worry, we got the security sorted. He seemed to like gloss over the security, which seemed to be a major consideration
he did get
for using commercial tech.
He did get asked about it with a question about how you provision SIMs.
Right.
Because the easiest way to do it, if you the military obviously wants you to be on their tactical slice kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then maybe not at times with access to the main public network.
But still using commercial rather than proprietary
The easiest
technology.
way to do that is to have 2 SIM cards at the moment.
Yeah.
But that's a faff changing things around, and it's
although plenty of phones have got dual SIMs in them.
There are, but...
And we're getting more towards an eSIM world as well.
We are, but it's not always the case, is it?
Yeah.
And then an eSIM would be the way they want to do it, which is basically you go... So I think the main impetus for them to do this, by the way, is something they call the Norwegian Home Guard, which is a bit like our territorial army or something, where people spend a few... No, not Dad's... The TA. In the
Dad's
UK.
Army was a TA.
Was it the Territorial Army? But people join the Territorial Army now and they just do like a couple of weeks a year where they go
exactly, part-timers.
Part-timers, basically. So you've got these guys who do a few days a year actually in the army.
I think they called them the Home Guard back then.
The Home Guard, yeah. And they what they want to do is so they could basically scan a QR code and then you go into a device management system where Telia can take over the control of that device and put it on their military slice of the 5G network for the time that you're doing your week service, and then you kind of go back to the real world and you're back on the mainstream sort of public network. That's kind of how ideally it would work, but they're not quite there yet, he said. But I think that's how you deal with something like that. The idea of slicing is that you would have those security guarantees.
Yeah, well, that seems like the best of both worlds, because obviously using commercial or proprietary tech makes sense because...
Well, it's cheaper, for one thing.
It's cheaper, and the interoperability.
It, yeah.
I keep picking words that at this stage in the pod I shouldn't be trying to use.
There's a good photo that he had of that girl called Dasha, who's in the Ukrainian army. It's a really weird picture with a tank in the background, a muddy road, and some woman in combat fatigues,
and
then she's holding a pink phone. And it's like...
I thought that's sexist.
This is kind of her device that she's brought.
Why can't she have a black phone?
Bring your own device, but bring it to a battlefield kind of thing.
Yeah.
So,
in principle, you should be able to do that. I mean, I do look forward to a time when, for example, really confidential documents like passports can be on your phone. Yeah. And so I have to worry less about forgetting shit.
Yeah.
Because in principle, if you got like 2-factor authentication, I don't know. You remember I spoke on the pod a little while ago when I lost my old phone. But it's quite hard to hack into my phone because it's got facial recognition and fingerprint. Why can't I have my passport on that? It seems pretty secure. It certainly seems as secure as carrying around a little booklet.
Yeah. But so your whole life will be on there, and when you lose your phone,
well, there is that.
There is that. You'll
well, and then there's
won't be worth living anymore, Scott.
And there's further security considerations because I'll lose my phone. And then maybe it'll all be backed up to the cloud.
Yeah.
But then we've got security considerations of the cloud.
Out of business.
Yeah.
And we'll all be living in log cabins and hunting for animals in the evening.
I think AWS had another little.
They did. I didn't write about it though.
Little meltdown. Anyway, we're nearly out of time. So yes, basically private networks. The thing I took from that event is there's lots of interesting stuff. It's just such a slow burner, like with nearly everything else to do with 5G.
Yeah.
One last thing I want to say, actually, last shout out to Charlie. He said, even though he's been a Yank for 30 years, he's still really into cricket.
Yeah.
And the Ashes just started today. So I thought I'd sum up because multitasker I am. I've been keeping an eye on the score while we've been doing the pod. And we're at 274 for 5 on the first day of the Ashes. It was looking bad, but we've just had a good partnership that's hung around for a while. Johnny Bairstow and Joe Root. So hopefully by the time I publish this, they will both got double tons. So I thought I'd give you a shout out for that, Charlie. It's looking even Stevens so far on the first day, but these two both need to get a ton, otherwise Australia's on top. Okay, I think I'll knock it on the head there. Are we good?
Yep.
All right. Thank you for watching, and make sure you join us for the next one.